I'm aware in the room that we've got a variety of ages, and so first of all I want to speak to the guys who are the youngest ages, the Riot guys in particular. And do you know when you're on a car journey with your parents or your carer or your mum or your dad or whoever, and you know they kind of draw attention to things on the way and you're too busy looking at your screens in the back or just ignoring them, and there are a couple of moments on the way where you'll pick up something from the journey and you won't pick up all of it because you're not the driver. In fact, a little secret for you, sometimes the driver doesn't pick it up all either. They just are good at blagging it, and sometimes they can get from A to B and not even realise that they just did that driving. And so in this today, I want to make a couple of comments because there's a lot going on in what I'm going to speak about today. And so I want to give you the big landmark stuff right at the beginning that you do not forget it. And it is this: that Jesus Christ took your place because he was kind enough and loved us so much that he wanted to take our place so that we got what we didn't deserve. And he took what he didn't deserve that we did. So in his kindness, he swapped places with us. And I will illustrate this in a minute. But as a consequence of that, as a result, because he did that for you, and because he did that for you, it changes everything in your life. It has a huge change and impact on your life. And I want you to take that landmark and that landmark and that landmark on the journey, okay? Landmark number 1, he took your place. Landmark number 2, he did it because he loves us. And landmark number 3, it changes everything. Changes everything. And so now I'm going to kind of get in the car and we're going to go on this journey, okay? And there's going to be some bits where you'll go, I didn't even listen at that bit, and I get that, and that's okay. Try not to fall out the car or anything like that, and try not to kick the driver, or I'm effectively the engine, but that might be stretching the illustration, so let's crack on. Okay, so we're going to come to a bit in Mark's Gospel, and I'm just going to bring it up, and it's Mark chapter 9, and it says this. It's in verse 30 and verse 31, and it says this: leaving that region, in other words, leaving an area, this is Jesus and the disciples, they traveled through another area called Galilee. And it says Jesus didn't want anyone to know he was there, and then it says this, for he wanted to spend some time with his disciples and teach them. He wanted to spend some time with his disciples and teach them. There is not a slower day coming, and you can't save time, and you can't add to time. Time just happens, you know? And therefore, whenever you say yes to something, you say no to something else. And I want to encourage you this afternoon, because by being here, you said yes to the idea that God might teach you. And this is the thing, again, another little landmark moment, if you're in the back seat here, is this. God wants to spend time with us, and he wants to teach us. And often, we're not actually the ones who are spending time with him and listening to what he wants to teach us. But today, we've done that. We've done that. And what's fascinating about this verse that says that is this: as they said, they went from this area and this area, and Jesus didn't want to go to the crowds. He wanted to teach them. Therefore, everything and every bit of the passage I'm going to get onto today, and there are some odd bits or challenging bits or whatever, you've got to say to yourself, he wants to use this to teach us. And we need to try and understand, therefore, what is he trying to teach us from it? And if we just bring up that verse 31, then it says, straight after that, it says this: he said to them, the Son of Man, which is Jesus, it's a name that Jesus used for himself. It's a name described and used in the Bible to describe the one that would come and take our place and be the one that would swap places with us. It says this: the Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of his enemies. He will be killed, but 3 days later, he will rise from the dead. So what you've got in this bit of the book of Mark is Jesus has just been up one mountain. He's been up one mountain where they have seen him at his best, in his whitest of white. He's been revealed to them, and they have seen it, and that's a previous talk I've spoken on. And now, though, he's coming down that mountain. He's going on to another mountain, and that mountain is the one called Calvary, which is where the cross, where Jesus died, is. That's where he's going. That is the heart of the book of Mark. It's not the first mountain, it's the second mountain, the cross. He is going to the cross. He is saying to them in verse 31, just leave the verses up, guys. He is saying to them, the Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of his enemies. He will be killed, but 3 days later he will rise from the dead. His coming, Jesus Christ, his dying, his rising are what the Bible has described of first importance. These are the things that you need to get hold of. You need to understand that in his dying, he took your place. In his rising, you rise with him. And it changes everything. That is the point of the Bible, to tell that story of the coming of Jesus to achieve that end. It says in verse 32 this is a fascinating statement. They didn't understand, this is the disciples who were with Jesus, what he was saying. However, they were afraid to ask him what he meant. They didn't understand, and they were afraid to ask. There are two things going on here for those who are following Jesus, and it includes those who are following Jesus, is the battle to constantly understand what that meant. What meant? That Jesus is going to be betrayed into the hands of his enemies. He will be killed, but 3 days later he will rise from the dead. And you might think at that point, and I can fall into this trap and do regularly, oh, I understand it. Oh, I get it. And in one sense I do, but other times I learn it afresh. What does that mean for me? What does that mean for me? But this is a great summary of the world. Because the world is actually afraid to ask him what it really means. There is a desire in us to resist the meaning of the cross in our lives. You see, I have said already at the beginning of this changes everything. Everything. And there is a desire built into us as human beings, is that we say it changes most things or some things, but not everything. But the heart of the book of Mark is this, and the heart of the Bible is it changes everything. Everything. On the cross, he took our place. We swapped. Now, he therefore gave us all his obedience and gave us all his kindness and gave it to us. And in our place, he suffered all that we should suffer. And we received all the obedience that we should have obeyed with. You see, on the cross, we swapped. On the cross, he took my life. He took my life. And he gave me his on the cross. And he did the same for you. On the cross. There was this exchange. There was this swapping. There was this substitution. For our sake, it says this, for our sake, he who had all the riches of heaven and all the riches of the world, and he had it all, he took the ultimate demotion and he became poor for our sake, so that what could happen is that we might become rich. That we might become rich. Changes everything. And so what's then fascinating is this, though he's taught them that, he said he wanted to teach them that. It's important that we understand that swap. What then happens? Let's just follow it as they continue on their journey from verse 33 onwards. He says this, after they arrived in Capernaum and settled in a house, Jesus asked his disciples, what were you discussing out on the road? Now you might think at this point must have been discussing, surely they were discussing this great exchange that is going to happen. Even though they don't understand it all and they're afraid to ask him, they must have been discussing that. Surely that changes everything. They're getting the idea that this is going to change things. But it doesn't say that. In fact, he says they don't answer the question because in verse 34 it says this, they didn't answer because they had been arguing about which of them was the greatest. And he sat down and he called the 12 disciples over and he said to them, whoever wants to be first must take last place and be the servant of everyone else. It would be a tragedy for me, and it would be a tragedy for you to get to the end of your walk in this life and discover that we missed the point entirely. It would be a tragedy. It would be a tragedy that when we meet him face to face, he calls us over, he sits down, and he says, you missed it entirely. You missed it entirely. And then two things now happen, okay? And they're kind of like bookends. You know what I mean by bookends? Because nobody has books anymore, do they, I guess, do we? But bookends used to hold books up on a shelf. So this end would be held up by this bookend, and this end would be held up by this bookend, and there would be a load of books in between, yeah? This thing is a kind of bookend moment, okay? There are two things that happen, and they kind of work together. And this is what happens in verse 36 to 41. He says this, then he put a little child among them. Taking the child in his arms, he said to them, anyone who welcomes a little child like this on my behalf welcomes me. And anyone who welcomes me welcomes not only me, but also my Father who sent me. And then that's bookend number one, this child. And then bookend number two is this moment where John says, teacher, this is Jesus. Jesus, we saw someone using your name to cast out demons, and we told him to stop because he wasn't in our group. Which is crazy, because if you were familiar with this book and you listened to the previous talk in the series, you'll realize that they had only minutes before, when they came down off the mountain, tried to do the same thing themselves and failed abysmally. And now they're having a pop or a moan or trying to stop somebody else doing it because they weren't in our group. And Jesus says this, don't stop him. No one who performs a miracle in my name will soon be able to speak evil of me. Anyone who is not against us is for us. If anyone gives you even a cup of water because you belong to the Messiah, I tell you the truth, that person will surely be rewarded. So you've got two things going on here. Remember the bookend thing? You've got the weaker, the smaller, the lesser, the child. Then at this end, you've got the bigger, the better, the stronger. You've got the two comparisons. And in the middle of the disciples, some of them going, well, they're a bit better than us, they're a bit bigger than us, they're a bit more effective than us, so we don't like them because they're not in our group. And then you've got this over here, this little child, and they're missing the point entirely because he's lesser, smaller, less important, it would seem. And Jesus uses that illustration, doesn't he? He says a small cup of water, insignificant. He wasn't in our group. So there's a few things I want to draw out of this and I want to move on. When we look at others and what really is going to matter, can I ask us not to miss the moment of the things that really matter? Because it can be a cup of water and the small thing, not necessarily the big thing. Secondly, it's really, really important for us, individually and as a church, to be part of something bigger. It's good for us. We don't have to always get on, as it were. We do in one sense, as we'll get to that. We don't always have to be exactly the same, but it's really important that we're part of something bigger. And it's really important that we look for fruit in others, not falsehood first. We're too quick to criticize. We're too quick to say, yeah, but they didn't do this and they didn't do that. I ask the question, do we see fruit? If we see fruit, that's a good place to start. And the third thing I want to add on that is this. Through what happened at the cross, this swap that took place, let's just get the ownership thing right. We belong to him. He does not belong to us. 1 Corinthians 6:20 says, we were bought at a price. He paid for us. We didn't pay for him. That's the point. So the idea that he isn't in our group, even the idea of our group is a mistake anyway. Because there isn't a group here and a group there. There's a body called the church that links to Jesus Christ. And therefore, this swap changes everything. And it changes the way we think about one another. And it changes the way we think about others. Now I'm going to move on to this final bit really as I just draw to the last sort of 8 verses really I want to speak on today. I had a boss and I'm going to name him, okay? This goes out on YouTube, but I'd like to think he watches. If he does, I'll know because he'll ring up and say, you've insulted me in some way, shape or form. And he was called Emeris, and we had what we called Emerisms. And Emerisms were effectively, well, I'll give you an example of an Emerism. We need to get the spaghetti and we need to put it back into the tin. That was one. We need this to wash its face. That was another Emerism. Where you would sit there and you would say, we're not really talking about spaghetti and this thing isn't really going to wash its face, but we kind of understood what he meant. And I'm sure you've met people like that, and it's like the phrase, isn't it? We all need to sing off the same hymn sheet, which is a bit weird because we don't do that anymore at all, do we? We all need to sing off the same TV screen, but that's not true either. But you get the idea. These are Emerisms. They're not literal, they're not real, they're trying to make a point. In other words, when Emrys used to say, I'm trying to put the spaghetti back in the tin, I'm trying to take the mess that's been created and we're trying to get it back into some level of order. That's the point I think that he was making with that Emerism. I never really knew, but that's what I think was going on. So Jesus just continues and he uses a small child as an illustration, and these are now what I call biblical Emerisms. It's a new thing. Okay, so we're going to continue that. It says this in verse 42. So he takes one of these, the little child as the idea. If you cause any one of these little ones who trust in me to fall into sin, it would be better for you to be thrown into the sea with a large millstone hung around your neck. Now, therefore, this is getting across an important point, but not real. The millstone was a massive, massive, heavy stone. And he was saying, you might as well just get a stone, tie it around your neck, jump off Swansea Pier. I don't really know how deep it is in Swansea Pier. Jump off somewhere deep on the Gower, because you kind of feel you could walk out for about 3 miles and only be there, don't you? So jump off somewhere deep, and it would be better for you to do that than cause someone, particularly a weaker one, a smaller one, a little one, to stumble because of you. So Jesus is just making an important point. It gets kind of more serious. It's like point, 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 point to get across the point. So he then says this: if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It's better to enter eternal life, or another way of saying it is to enter the kingdom of God, Jesus' rule and reign, with only one hand, than to go into the unquenchable fires of hell with two hands. Now, where this is coming from is this: outside of where they would be going, which is Jerusalem, there was like a city dump, and that was known as hell. And what he's really saying is this. Again, he's making the same point. This is serious. Don't do this. Don't cause others to stumble. Don't stumble yourself. Take some action, because if you don't take action, it will be a tragedy for you. And then he continues. And did you see now why I said, do you know when he said he wanted to teach them? Do you know where Paul writes to Timothy and he says all scripture is God-breathed and useful for teaching, rebuking and correcting? Everybody wants, and even those who are doing the teaching, you want to skip over this stuff because this stuff's hard, one, to explain, and two, it's just hard to explain. So he continues. So he's done the hand, now he does the foot. Point, 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 big point. We're going to come to the big point. The foot. He says this: it's better to enter if your foot causes you sin, cut it off. Same principle again. It's better to basically hop following Jesus than it is to walk in the wrong direction entirely. And then he says, if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out. Gosh, it's graphic, isn't it? It's better to enter the kingdom of God with only one eye than to have two eyes and be thrown into hell. And just to finish off the point, where the maggots never die and the fire never goes out. Now I know where Emrys got his Emerisms from. So what does this all mean? Don't get to the end of the walk and realize we missed it entirely. Missed what really mattered. Missed what this really meant for us. Don't miss it. Don't get to the end when you meet Jesus and realize the things that you've fought over and the things that you've fought for and the things that you gave your life to didn't matter as much as the things that really mattered. Really mattered. It's better to be 50% less effective, 50% less active, and 100% obedient to what really matters. It's better to have half your hands, half your feet, half your eyes, 50% less effective, 50% less active, and do the things that really matter. There are plenty of people who are busy in the name of Christianity, and we can miss the point entirely because we haven't got time for the little moments and the weakest ones. And then we spend our whole time looking at them, trying to stop them from doing what they're doing. And this idea of hand, feet, and eyes could be said like this. Hands, what we do. Feet, what we say. Eyes, how we see and think. 50% less effective and active in order that we get it right. Some of us have spent our days reading up on things about Christianity which, quite frankly, will not help you do the most important things well. I've often said that Christianity is about the simple things. Love your neighbor. Love one another. Understand this with increasing measure. But we can spend our days reading books about what others are doing and losing ourselves in those things, and they do us no good whatsoever. We spend our days saying things about others that really don't achieve anything, instead of having the opportunity to speak words of life into our weaker brothers and sisters. We spend our days telling them to stop what they're doing. Stop what they're doing. We don't like what they do. Let's spend our days celebrating when someone gives you a cup of water in Jesus' name. Because he says, you welcome me, and the one who welcomes me welcomes the Father. He then comes on to these final verses. If you think, oh gosh, it's Emmerism after Emmerism after Emmerism, and now we got two more. We've done the feet and the hands. We seem to have got that sorted. Right, now we move on to two others. For everyone will be tested with fire. Everyone will be tested with fire. What fire does is it removes. Fire removes things and keeps the good things. That's what he means. Fire is used to purify things. Fire is done intentionally to remove the dross, the rubbish, to keep the good things. So it's the idea of removing things, fire. And it says everyone will be tested with fire. Everyone. Everyone. If you're there in your life thinking you haven't been tested with fire, you need to get a smoke detector in your life, because I'm telling you, there is one coming if there ain't been one already. Make that your prayer. Lord, let the alarm go off, that I might know when it's fire. Not everything will go our way. Not everything will be in our control in this life. But every moment, every cup of water, every moment is an opportunity. Every moment is an opportunity for us to understand what these two verses meant. Verse 31. He said to them, the Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of his enemies. He will be killed, and 3 days later he will rise from the dead. And then he went on to them and he said this, just after they'd been arguing on the road about who is the greatest. He sat down, called the 12 disciples over to him and said, whoever wants to be first must take last place and be the servant of everyone else. Everyone will be tested with fire. Every moment is an opportunity for us to understand what this meant for us. There is a real risk with the Christian life, is that we think this only really counts at the beginning of the Christian life. And my suggestion to us today is it counts all the way through. It has implications and it changes everything. And then he goes on now to use another illustration, another image. So he's used fire, which removes, and now he's going to use salt, which kind of keeps things and preserves things and looks after things. And he says this, salt is good for seasoning, but if it loses its flavor, how do you make it salty again? You must have quality of salt amongst yourselves and live in peace with one another. Live in peace. Do you see how this links? You can't teach about the argument on the road without teaching this stuff. Because this is the point he's trying to get across to them, following the argument on the road. They're arguing about who is the greatest, and he says, point. Big point here. Guys, do you not see what this will mean for you? This exchange, it changes everything. And it means that we will live in peace with one another. Why? Because of this reason. Understand this. He says that he will be delivered into the hands of his enemies. Enemies. Before this exchange took place, we were enemies of God. And it's through Jesus Christ and this incredible exchange on the cross that we have had peace with God made for us. And therefore, why would we then, if we understand that and we don't resist it and we understand what it means, why would we not live in peace with one another? Why would we argue at all? And if we do argue, why would we not seek to make it right as quick as possible? Surely we would. This is the salt. To keep the cross and the resurrection front and center in our lives and allow it to change us in every way. How we walk, how we talk, how we think, how we see on the road. On the road. Do you know the greatest concern I have is this, from this talk today? is that we turn our Christianity into we turn our Christianity into instead of, not because of. And I'll explain what I mean. That's the risk. We turn our Christianity into instead of rather than because of. Some of you will have seen the film Saving Private Ryan, and I'm going to finish with these couple of minutes on this, okay? Saving Private Ryan, yeah? You might have seen it, but I'll just give you the quick headlines of the story. It's set in the Second World War, and it's the D-Day Normandy landings. It's around that time, so 75 years ago is when the story is set. And Private Ryan is one of, I think he's 4 or 5 brothers. And in the build-up to the D-Day landings, his other brothers are all killed. And the mother is going to get the telegrams that say your sons are all dead, bar one. And this final Private Ryan, he is parachuted somewhere deep into enemy lines. And the powers that be determined that actually they are not going to allow this mother to get a 5th telegram saying that your 5th and final son has died in the war. So they determine that other men, led by the character played by Tom Hanks, are going to go and find Private Ryan. They're going to bring him out of the battle so that he will live. And they're going to risk their lives to get him, yeah? And so as the film works out, they're trying to find Ryan deep in enemy lines, as it were, behind, and Tom Hanks and his crew are trying to find him. And eventually this captain who Hanks plays finds Ryan. And just before they can extract Private Ryan, there's a huge battle that takes place. And in that battle, the captain that has basically led the charge to save Private Ryan, he dies or is mortally wounded. And as he's dying, he grabs Ryan, pulls him forward, and he says to him, "Earn this. Earn this." And if you're familiar with the film, you'll remember then what happens. The camera fades, as cameras do fade in films, and it goes forward 70 years or so to the American cemetery near Omaha Beach. And there is this old man who is Private Ryan. And he says and turns to his family with tears in his eyes, and he says, "Tell me I've lived a good life. Tell me I've lived a good life." And he's looking at the grave of this captain. Why do I tell that story? Because that story has parallels to this. It has parallels to the swap that took place at the cross and the implications for us. You see, Ryan's life was purchased for him that day on the bridge in 1944. And effectively, Tom Hanks' character grabs him and he says something like this when he uses those words, "earn this." He says this: "Live out your life with fear and trembling because of this great act of sacrifice that has been made to bring you home." Live it out in response. Not instead of, but because of. It changes everything. In other words, if we understand that the Son of Man took our place so that we might take his place, that we might receive all that he gave up, so that he would receive all that we deserved. If we understand that, it changes everything. And do you know one of the best things it changes of all? It changes of all things is this. He sat down and he called them over to himself and he said this: "Whoever wants to be first must take last place and be the servant of everyone else." On the cross, Jesus took last place and was the servant of everyone else. He's first. He's first. And therefore I go all the way back round to the beginning. And I ask the question, is he first? Is he first in everything? Everything. You see, we don't put him first in order to earn it. We do it in first because of it. Because we realize that it means that we have gained so much. Why would we not live like that? Most people are afraid to ask the question about the cross because they fear that they will lose. They don't want to really grapple with the cross because they fear that they'll lose. They'll have to give up stuff that they want to keep. But it's foolishness. Because when you understand the cross and the exchange that took place, we understand that we have gained so much more than we can ever lose.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you'd like to learn more about the Hill Church, please visit our website, the-hill.co, or come and see us on Sunday at 4 p.m. in